can see that the current crisis is another temporal marker for the 3D, 5D split. And this is going to be looked back on, I feel, as one of the critical temporal markers that is showing this divergence or this split in consciousness between the 3D and 5D reality as they're generally known in the awakening community. This is a complex process, and the logic and reasoning behind this is quite complicated to express, but I'll do my best now to try to convey this energetic split that's actually starting to become more apparent. But when we talk about a split, it doesn't mean that the two realities are split in two. There is a huge grey area there, which is good because many of the people who are going through this process now are still going to have the opportunity to move into the higher frequencies. Now, things are not black and white is what's important to convey here at the moment. But we can see that there is a trend where things are starting to actually split. Now, if we look at this century, in my view, there's been 4 critical temporal markers. Now, going back into the previous century, we can see that perhaps the age of Aquarius began in the counterculture movement of the 60s, the hippie movement. There would be arguments even that it actually commenced before that with the Beat Generation, the poets, the writers of that phenomenon, the Beat Generation there, which was even just post-World War II in the 50s. And there's even a crossover between the Beat Generation and the counterculture of the 60s. But if we fast forward that into this century, in my view, there have been 4 key temporal markers for the awakening, at least in the initial phases of it. And this is just my interpretation. Other people may have a completely different interpretation on it. That's fine. But the first one would be September 11, 2001, the Twin Towers. And that basically gave rise to the birth of the truth movement, what's known as the truth movement, which is still obviously around today, but some of these things are a little bit fluid and morph into other groups and classifications and so on. But this 2001 was a big red pill for many people. And then, of course, 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar, the long count of the Mayan calendar, that was highly significant, energetical. That was really the real key temporal marker, at least in the Gregorian calendar, considering it from that overlay, that we're now moving into this new paradigm, however you want to express it, in the different traditions, the different names given to it. But yes, so that's the second one, December 21st, 2012, highly significant date, and in many ways the most important temporal marker of this century so far. The third one was a little bit unknown one, actually, that flew under the radar actually a lot, was 2017. It wasn't a specific date or time period, but basically it started around the autumn of March here in the Southern Hemisphere in Australia, and then stretched right out for about 6 months, where the 5D frequencies came through the strongest that they have in this entire period, including where we're up to now. That dropped off, though, quite significantly after that influx. But what's significant is that it was like a warm-up to energize people, prepare people for what's to come. Very exciting and very tangible as well. Not sort of something too lofty or foggy or fluffy. I'll be making other videos on the significance of this and this timeless state, this dislocation from time and space, which is extremely irrelevant for the awakening. And that brings us up to the 4th temporal marker, which is the crisis that's unfolding at the moment. So it's not really clear to say one day to the next. We're just in this zone, if you want to look at it like that there is this temporal marker. And this one is highly significant, as I see it, because the attitudes that people are expressing, the consciousness that people are expressing, and the awakening people are going through is it's quite amazing to see that the truth of what's really going on is permeating many different levels and layers of society. And it's quite fascinating to see from a consciousness point of view. So many people are really waking up. It's been fascinating, and we're only in the beginning of this. I mean, the fallout from this crisis it hasn't even begun yet. So we're really in the very beginning stages of where this is going, and also the global awakening that will spread, like dominoes falling, basically where we're at now. So the split is evident in the sense people's attitude to the information or the truth coming through. What's concerning for me is that many people are not getting the message, not understanding what's occurring. Now, your awakening is not defined by your understanding of the medical, social, economic, political aspects of this crisis, but more your relationship to the adaptability and the mutability of consciousness around the fluidity as to whether you're understanding that the propaganda system is there to confuse you, to hypnotize you, to control you. Whereas the awakening is to dissolve the indoctrination, the various forms of mind control, the trust in certain institutions such as the mainstream media, which is really one of the big ones that's playing out on the world stage at the moment. As we're seeing it unfold, it really is a disaster for the credibility of mainstream media and even some of the institutions and organisations that are in the public eye, which are going to come under increased scrutiny as we move through this. Obviously, the big one initially is the World Health Organization and what's happened and transpired there with the recent events. This is going to amplify, diversify, and also intensify in many levels. But the concern is that people are turning away from the facts, turning away from the truth. Now, your relationship with the crisis and the information is not what's important. What is significant is if people are turning away from the truth, turning away from the facts. In essence, if you do that, you're turning away from the light itself, because the truth is the light. They are related, and in some ways they are one and the same. Where we are moving into now in the Hindu concept of time and cosmic cycles is what's called Satya Yuga. And Satya is Sanskrit for truth, the age of truth. And to bury your head in the sand when the information that is coming out day by day, even hour by hour at times, that is basically the indoctrination, the mainstream view of things is just falling apart. And to continually support that, not just be indifferent, but what we're seeing is there are people, unexpected at times, completely supporting this narrative of the mainstream, which is in essence not truth. Now, that is the fundamental issue. It's irrelevant what issue we're talking about, social, economic, political issue. It's just that the crisis is bringing this to the surface. And this is what people need to really understand, is that the truth and the light are the same. And it's uncomfortable to have your values challenged, your relationship with who you trust, who is dependable, who is having credibility, and who isn't. But it's okay to admit that you got it wrong. I mean, it takes a big person to admit when they got it wrong. But the issue that we're having is that people are falling back into this protective, secure environment as they're experiencing it, which is not actually at all the truth. It's just their experience of it. And then having this interpretation that people are actually, who are spreading the truth, are spreading fear. That's their experience of it. The mainstream media is actually the one spreading the hysteria and the fear around this crisis, which there's some of the headlines are just completely irresponsible and blown out of proportion completely. I won't go into that now, but it's just a continual trend. And then when people are presented with the real information, the truth, they are interpreting that in their reality as being fear, that other people are spreading fear. But the truth is empowering in this way, because it means actually that you can actually start to become an empowered individual, a sovereign individual, which is a big part of this 3D, 5D split. And it becomes really apparent people that aren't actually at this point in time embracing their sovereignty, embracing their true empowerment, making their own minds up about things, doing their own research, drawing their own conclusions, and really finding this empowered state, which is free from fear. The light will give you this courage, this momentum to actually become more and more of a sovereign individual. That doesn't mean that, all these rebellious things and so on. I'm not talking about that. I'm more talking about someone who is empowered at a personal level. So this is where the split is really showing up. And the problem is that someone who is going through this process and defending the institutions, organizations, it actually is revealing that it's actually an intensification of the ego. Now, people who are on the awakening journey also need to realize that there can be this as well in the need to be right, and the need to show the truth, and the need to convey the message of the truth. So what's more significant is your intention behind that. So it basically comes down to motivation, and more specifically intent. And this is where the ego can fall into another form of intensification. But the point I'm making in this video is that if you find yourself defending things, and you're doing it from the need to be right and the need to have this, I told you so type of attitude, then it's not a superior state just because you understand the truth about what's going on with the different statistics and all these sorts of things. So it's very important to be aware of that, to become conscious of that, even if it's a process. As I keep saying, you don't go from 0 to 100 in one go. It's a process. But this split of the crisis of this 2020 is, wow, it's really showing up really clearly. And I am confident that a lot of people in this confused state that a lot of people have been in, it's very clear, very, very confused, a lot of confusion that people are experiencing, that people, as they take their time to digest information, contemplate information, reevaluate who they consider credible sources of information to be, can move through this fog and into a state of greater clarity, greater discernment, and a more lucid mind, a more clear mind. And this is very necessary for where we're going, because this is really just the beginning of this process. But it's like a staircase. It's still intensifying, and not only that, the speed of the events is intensifying as well. So it really is a roller coaster, and we can really see that this 3D 5D split, it's, if you want to think of it in timelines, that they're kind of gradually moving apart from one another. It can be helpful to think of it in this way, but it's, there's a lot of people who are awakening through this process. It's quite staggering to see, but it's just always a case to be a member of your own ego and what's going on with that. It's really important for all of us, and this only comes through increased self-awareness and this lucidity and the process of evolution we're all undergoing. Plenty more to come. Thanks for watching. We live in epic times.